The city pulsed with restless energy, neon lights flickering against the night sky like dying stars. Ethan Blake leaned against the polished door of his black sedan, his tailored suit untouched by the chaos around him. But something tugged at him, a fleeting, almost imperceptible pull, as if fate itself had brushed past his soul. His sharp blue eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on her. A girl, her hands trembling yet determined, holding a fragile bouquet of roses wrapped in old newspaper, her voice cutting through the noise, desperate and proud. And in that instant, Ethan Blake's perfectly curated life began to unravel. Lily Brooks gritted her teeth as another businessman brushed her off without a glance. Her hands ached from the cold, but she refused to give up. These roses weren't just flowers. They were tonight's dinner, tomorrow's rent, next week's hope. She caught movement from the corner of her eye, a tall man staring, his gaze heavy with something she couldn't place. Was it pity? Curiosity? No, it was something rawer. Something she hadn't seen in a long time, recognition. Before she could turn away, he was in front of her, towering and silent, his presence disrupting the rhythm of the street. She stiffened instinctively, gripping the stem so tightly the thorns bit into her skin. "How much for all of them?" he asked, his voice low, almost amused. She narrowed her eyes. Rich men like him didn't buy street flowers. They bought skyscrapers and politicians. $50, she challenged, raising her chin defiantly. His lips curved into a ghost of a smile. Without hesitation, he pulled out a crisp $100 bill and handed it to her. Lily stared at it, suspicion warring with survival. "I don't have change," she said flatly. "Keep it," he murmured, his voice almost lost to the city's hum. Something about his tone made her chest tighten. Not condescension, not charity. Something else, something she couldn't afford to trust. She shoved the bill into her jacket pocket and thrust the roses toward him. "They're yours," she said sharply, turning away before he could see the burning behind her eyes. But he didn't move. He just stood there, watching her, as if trying to memorize every broken piece. Lily didn't look back. She couldn't. If she did, she might crumble, and crumbling was a luxury she could no longer afford. Ethan watched her disappear into the crowd, clutching her worn coat tighter against the biting wind. For a moment, he considered walking away, slipping back into the life where he controlled every outcome, where emotions were liabilities. But he couldn't. Something about her haunted him. The defiant tilt of her chin, the weary pride in her step. Against all logic, he wanted to know her story, needed to. Back in his penthouse, Ethan poured himself a drink, the city sprawling endlessly beyond the glass walls. He should have forgotten her the moment he stepped into the elevator. Instead, he replayed the encounter over and over, each detail sharpening until it felt like a scar carved into his mind. "You're losing it," he muttered to himself, setting the glass down with more force than necessary, but the feeling refused to fade. Meanwhile, Lily trudged up the creaky stairs to her tiny apartment, her legs heavy, her spirit heavier. She slammed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing in the familiar scent of cracked plaster and hope deferred. Pulling the bill from her pocket, she stared at it as if it might burst into flames. Money like this didn't fall from the sky without consequences. And yet, part of her, the tired, hungry part, whispered that maybe, just maybe, tonight was different. She collapsed onto the mattress on the floor, their only furniture besides a cracked table, and listened to the sounds of the city leaking through the broken window. Somewhere a siren wailed, somewhere a baby cried, and somewhere a man with eyes like a winter storm was thinking about her. She didn't know that, of course. She only knew that tonight. For the first time in a long while, she had $50, more than she expected, and that scared her more than being broke ever had. Ethan found himself scrolling mindlessly through his phone, searching for what? Her face? Her name? He didn't even know it. The thought made him laugh bitterly. Ethan Blake didn't get obsessed. He built empires. He destroyed competition. He didn't chase after girls with newspaper-wrapped flowers, yet here he was, a man who could buy anything, realizing he couldn't buy peace of mind. The night stretched on mercilessly, both of them trapped in their respective cages, him in his glittering tower, her in her crumbling walls. Two worlds that should never collide, connected by a single fragile thread of human need. Neither could sleep. Neither wanted to admit why. And somewhere in the darkness, fate sharpened its claws, preparing to tear both their lives apart. By morning, the city had washed itself clean with rain. Lily pulled on her frayed jacket and gathered what few flowers she had left. She didn't expect to see him again. Men like that didn't venture into the same place twice. They had short attention spans and shorter memories. But as she rounded the corner to her usual spot, her heart stumbled in her chest, because there he was, leaning against a lamppost, looking for all the world like he belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. Their eyes locked, and for a moment the noise of the city faded into a dull roar. Lily tightened her grip on her basket, her body tense with wariness. Ethan pushed off the post and approached slowly, as if trying not to startle a wild animal. "Morning," he said casually, but there was an undercurrent to his voice, a gravity that tugged at her. She stayed silent, waiting. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. "You didn't tell me your name," he said. Lily hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run, but something stronger, a tiny, reckless spark of curiosity, made her answer. "Lily," she said. "Lily Brooks." Ethan nodded slowly, committing it to memory like a sacred vow. "Ethan Blake," he said simply. No titles, no bravado, just a name, a bridge. She gave him a long, appraising look, then turned back to her basket. "You buying flowers again, Mr. Blake?" she asked, her voice cool. Ethan's mouth twitched. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'm just here for the company." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Lily didn't trust easy. She had learned the hard way that promises were just lies in prettier wrapping. But as she looked into his storm-grey eyes, she realized something chilling. If she wasn't careful, this man could destroy her without even trying, and worse, some part of her might let him. The air between them was taut, like a wire ready to snap. Lily forced herself to look away, feigning indifference as she shuffled through the wilting flowers in her basket. Ethan didn't move, didn't pressure, just stood there quietly, patient in a way that made her nerves crackle. "You're not buying," she said, more accusation than observation. He chuckled lowly, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Maybe I'm considering it," he replied, voice soft but unreadable. Lily straightened, clutching her basket tighter against her chest. She didn't want his kindness, didn't want to owe him anything. Life had taught her that nothing came for free, and especially not from men like him. "Flowers don't fix everything," she muttered, half to herself, half daring him to argue. Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Neither does money," he said simply. That caught her off guard. People like him always believed money could solve everything, smooth over every crack, erase every scar. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Then why are you here, Ethan Blake?" she asked, voice edged with steel. His mouth curved into a half-smile, but there was sadness in it too, like he carried a weight she couldn't see. "Maybe I'm tired of things that can be bought," he murmured. For a fleeting second, something inside Lily softened, but she crushed it ruthlessly, like a weed trying to bloom through concrete. She couldn't afford to believe him, couldn't afford to trust. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Well, "You picked the wrong girl," she said, turning her back to him. "I'm not for sale." Ethan's smile faded as he watched her walk away, disappearing once more into the endless, indifferent river of people. Later that night, Lily lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling. The memory of Ethan's face burned behind her eyelids. She hated that he lingered in her mind, hated the small, traitorous part of her that wanted to believe he was different. She rolled over, burying her face in the threadbare pillow, willing herself to forget him. Ethan Blake was a storm, and she was a house of straw. If she let him in, he would destroy her. Across the city, Ethan stood by the window of his penthouse, a tumbler of untouched whiskey in his hand. The lights of New York stretched out before him, cold and glittering. He had spent years building walls around himself, insulating his heart against disappointment and betrayal. But somehow, Lily had slipped past all his defenses without even trying. He couldn't explain it. He didn't even want to try. The next morning, Lily's routine was the same. Wake up before dawn, salvage what flowers she could from the market's leftovers, and stake out her spot near the subway. She told herself she didn't expect to see him again. She lied to herself, too. When she spotted him leaning casually against a mailbox, arms crossed, she almost dropped her basket. "Persistent, aren't you?" she said, voice dry. Ethan shrugged, as if it cost him nothing to wait in the freezing cold just to see her. "Maybe I'm stubborn," he said, his eyes gleaming with something almost mischievous. Lily bit back a smile. She didn't want to encourage him. "You're wasting your time," she warned. "Maybe," he conceded, pushing off the mailbox and strolling closer, "but some things are worth the risk." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp voice cutting through the air. "Lily, where's my money?" A burly man with a thick neck and mean eyes pushed through the crowd toward her. Lily stiffened instantly, her entire body recoiling in fear. Ethan's expression darkened as he stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between her and the man. "Back off," Ethan said coldly. The man laughed humorlessly. "Mind your business, pretty boy. She owes me." Lily's face burned with shame. Ethan glanced at her, silently asking for permission. She shook her head quickly, a barely perceptible movement. No, this was her fight. Gathering every shred of courage, she faced the man. "You'll get your money next week, Vince," she said firmly, though her hands trembled. Vince sneered but backed off, muttering curses under his breath as he disappeared into the crowd. Ethan turned to Lily, fury simmering just beneath the surface. "Who was that?" he demanded. She picked up her basket, avoiding his gaze. "No one important." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to press, but something about the set of her jaw told him he wouldn't. "Get answers today." As she walked away, Ethan felt something new coil in his gut, protectiveness, and something even more dangerous, anger. Anger that the world had carved its marks into her so deeply that she expected betrayal at every turn. He followed her from a distance, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his mind spinning with plans he knew she would hate and need. Lily sensed him behind her but didn't say anything. Part of her was furious. Part of her was relieved. She hated that relief more than anything. When she reached her building, she paused, turning around sharply. Ethan stopped a few paces back. "You can't fix me," she said, voice trembling. "I'm not trying to," he replied quietly. "I'm just not leaving." Her breath caught. She hated him for saying exactly what she needed to hear. Without another word, she turned and disappeared inside. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the door she vanished through, feeling the first real crack split through the ice. Around his heart, and somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Lily pressed her forehead against the cold wood of the door after it shut behind her, her heart hammering wildly. Ethan's words echoed in her ears. "I'm not leaving," She hated how much she wanted to believe him. No one stayed. No one ever had. She slid down to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, trying to cage the surge of emotions that threatened to spill over. Ethan lingered outside for a few more minutes, staring at the building's cracked bricks and rusted fire escape. This wasn't the life he knew. This was survival in its rawest form. Somehow, it made Lily even more incredible to him. He didn't know how to help without overstepping, without driving her further away. But doing nothing? That wasn't an option he could live with anymore. The next day, Ethan returned to the spot by the subway. But Lily wasn't there. The empty corner gnawed at him like a wound. He waited for hours, long after the streetlights flickered on, but she never came. A cold knot of fear settled in his chest. Had something happened? Had he pushed too hard? He cursed under his breath, feeling more helpless than he had in years. Meanwhile, Lily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the single rose she hadn't been able to sell. She had skipped work, too exhausted emotionally to face Ethan again. She told herself she needed space, but deep down, she knew she was running from feelings she wasn't ready to face. Running from the terrifying thought that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had believed. Ethan wasn't the kind of man to wait passively. By the next morning, he had a plan. Using contacts he rarely relied on for personal matters, he discreetly found where Lily lived. He told himself it was just to check if she was safe. That was a lie he barely believed. When he saw her window cracked open and the thin curtain fluttering, a knot of guilt twisted inside him. He had invaded her space without permission. He left before she could see him, but his absence was only temporary. That afternoon, Lily found something unusual taped to her door. A single note, no signature. If you ever need help, no strings attached. Beneath it was a business card, Ethan Blake. Lily stared at it for a long time, her heart a battlefield of emotions. Part of her wanted to rip it to shreds. Part of her wanted to keep it forever. Against her better judgment, she slipped the card into her jacket pocket and went about her day. Selling flowers was harder now. Every face in the crowd blurred together. None of them him. She hated how empty the street felt without Ethan lurking nearby. She hated that she missed his infuriating persistence, his ridiculous stubbornness. She hated needing anyone. Just when she thought she had made it through the day without a breakdown, she felt a familiar presence behind her. Turning sharply, she found Ethan standing a few feet away, hands stuffed into his pockets, looking sheepish, a foreign expression on his usually confident face. "You're late," she said before she could stop herself, the words coming out softer than she intended. Ethan smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Traffic was a nightmare," he said, playing along. They stood there, neither speaking, neither moving, as the city roared around them. Then Lily did something reckless. She held out a rose to him, her hand trembling slightly. Ethan hesitated for only a heartbeat before taking it gently, as if it were something precious. "First one's free," she said, her voice breaking a little. Ethan's fingers brushed hers, warm, steady, grounding. "I'll still pay," he said quietly, slipping a folded bill into her palm. Lily didn't look at it. She couldn't. Her throat felt too tight, her chest too full. In that simple exchange, something shifted between them. A silent truce. A fragile thread pulling them closer. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan walked her halfway home, keeping a respectful distance. Lily didn't tell him to go away. She didn't tell him anything. But when they reached the corner near her building, she paused, turning to face him. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of all the people you could care about, why me?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Because you're the only one who's real," he said. The words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was broken, tainted, unworthy. But she couldn't find her voice. Instead, she just stared at him, her defenses crumbling faster than she could rebuild them. Ethan waited, patient, never pushing. Finally, she shook her head with a shaky laugh. "You're crazy," she said, but there was no venom in it. Only fear, only hope. Ethan grinned. Probably. A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Then Lily did the bravest thing she had done in years. She stepped forward and lightly rested her forehead against his chest, just for a second. Ethan's arms hovered awkwardly, for a moment before he gently folded them around her, holding her like she might break apart if he squeezed too tightly. Lily closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of soap and city rain clinging to his coat. She didn't know what this was, didn't know if it would last, but for the first time, she didn't run. For the first time, she let herself be held. Neither of them saw the dark silhouette watching from the shadows across the street. Neither of them heard the click of a lighter as a cigarette flared too. Life, briefly illuminating a familiar, cruel face. Vince leaned against the wall, a vicious grin curling his lips. He flicked the cigarette into the gutter and disappeared into the night, already plotting how to tear them apart. The next few days were almost peaceful. Almost normal, if such a thing could exist between two people like Ethan and Lily. She found herself smiling more, laughing even, though she hated how easily he coaxed it out of her. Ethan didn't push. He just showed up, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with silence, and Lily, against every instinct, let him stay. For once, the city felt a little less heavy on her shoulders. But in the cracks of that fragile happiness, danger crept silently. Vince wasn't a man who forgot slights easily. He had debts of his own, enemies who were less forgiving. And now he'd seen Lily clinging to a man who oozed money from every polished inch. His mind whirred with possibilities. If he couldn't get what he wanted from her, maybe he could get it from him. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the city's jagged skyline, Lily packed up her flowers slower than usual. Ethan leaned against a lamppost nearby, pretending not to watch her every move. She glanced at him over her shoulder, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "You waiting for an invitation?" she teased. Ethan grinned, pushing off the post. "Maybe." Their banter was easy, comforting, but as they turned the corner, a shadow peeled away from the alley. Vince watched them, his fists curling and uncurling at his sides. He lit another cigarette, the smoke wreathing around him like a predator stalking its prey. He had waited long enough. It was time to remind Lily Brooks that no one got away from him, not without paying a price. The next morning, Lily woke early to find something strange taped to her door. A single black rose, wilted and dripping ink, onto the wood. Her stomach dropped. She ripped it down, heart racing, scanning the hallway for any sign of who had left it. Nothing. Just silence and shadows. She stuffed the flower into the trash and tried to tell herself it didn't mean anything. But it did, and she knew it. When Ethan arrived at the subway station, he noticed her immediately. The tightness in her posture, the way her hands shook slightly as she arranged the flowers. He didn't press her at first. Instead, he bought a rose and tucked it behind her ear, smiling when she swatted at him half-heartedly. But as the day wore on, the tension radiating from her became impossible to ignore. Finally, after the crowds thinned, Ethan stepped closer. "Lily," he said, voice low. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, the urge to lie warring with the need to finally let someone in. After a long moment, she exhaled shakily. "It's nothing," she muttered. Ethan didn't move. He just waited, silent and steady, until the dam inside her cracked. "There's a man," she said, barely above a whisper. "Someone from before. He doesn't let things go." Ethan's jaw tightened, the muscles flexing under his skin. "Vince," he said grimly. Lily flinched, the small motion confirming what he already suspected. Ethan wanted to storm into whatever hole Vince crawled out of and end it. But this wasn't about what he wanted. It was about what Lily needed. "What do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. Lily looked up at him, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Nothing, I can handle it." Ethan's chest ached at the pride in her voice, the pride that had kept her standing long after most would have crumbled. But he saw the fear too, the way she clenched her fists to hide the trembling. He nodded slowly. "Okay. But if you change your mind, I'm here." That night, Lily dreamed of black roses and cold hands around her throat. She woke gasping, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. She stumbled to the window, throwing it open to gulp in the frigid night air. Somewhere, below, a car engine revved, then cut out sharply. She told herself it was nothing, just city noise, just paranoia. But deep down, she knew better. Ethan sat in his car a block away, staring at the dark silhouette of her building. He couldn't sleep, not with the knowledge that she was vulnerable, that danger circled her like a wolf. He had promised not to interfere unless she asked, but waiting, doing nothing, felt like trying to hold back a tidal wave with bare hands. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Meanwhile, Vince made his move. Not yet violence, that would be too easy, too obvious. No, he started small. Menacing notes slipped into Lily's basket when she wasn't looking. Strange phone calls that hung up when she answered. A growing, invisible pressure that coiled tighter around her chest with every passing day. Lily didn't tell Ethan. She couldn't. She wouldn't drag him down into her nightmare. But secrets have weight. And Lily's silence began to eat away at her. She snapped at Ethan for small things, pulled away when he tried to get close. Ethan, patient but not blind, felt her slipping through his fingers and didn't know how to stop it. They were standing on a crumbling ledge, both too afraid to reach for each other in case the fall was worse than the loneliness. One night, after a particularly brutal argument about nothing and everything, Lily found herself walking the streets alone. The city seemed colder, the shadows deeper. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her at first, but when she did, it was too late. A hand clamped over her mouth, yanking her into a dark alley. Panic exploded in her chest as she struggled against the iron grip, and somewhere, not far away, Ethan felt a cold shiver of dread slice through him, sharp and merciless. The alley was suffocating, the stench of rot and old rain clinging to the bricks. Lily struggled violently against the hand, crushing her mouth, her heart slamming against her ribs. Vince's breath was hot and sour against her ear. "Miss me, sweetheart?" he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Panic made her limbs clumsy, but fear sharpened her mind in ways survival demanded. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Lily stomped, hard on Vince's foot, and twisted sideways. His grip faltered just enough. She bit down on his hand, tasting blood and fury. Vince roared, throwing her against the wall with brutal force. Pain exploded across her shoulder, but she didn't stop moving. She kicked, clawed, fought with every shred of will she had left. Several feet away, Ethan rounded the corner, drawn by some primal instinct he couldn't explain. The second he saw Lily pinned against the bricks, something inside him snapped. He charged without thinking, slamming into Vince with the full force of his fury. The two men crashed to the ground, fists flying, grunts and curses tearing through the night air. Lily stumbled back, watching in horror as Ethan fought Vince with a violence she hadn't thought him capable of. Blood spattered the dirty pavement. Vince landed a hard punch to Ethan's jaw, but Ethan barely flinched. He grabbed Vince by the collar and drove him against the wall, his voice low and deadly. "Touch her again, and you'll pray for death," he snarled. Vince spat blood at Ethan's feet, sneering. "This isn't over, rich boy," he spat, before shoving off and disappearing into the maze of alleys. Ethan didn't chase him. He turned, immediately to Lily, breathing hard, blood trickling from his split lip. "Lily," he said, voice raw. She shrank back reflexively, her body still trapped in survival mode. He froze, raising his hands. "It's okay. It's me. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away furiously. She hated crying, hated being weak, but when Ethan stepped closer, slowly, carefully, she let him. He reached out and gently touched her face, checking for injuries with shaking fingers. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice cracking. Lily shook her head, but it wasn't true. She was hurt everywhere, just not in ways he could fix. Without thinking, she buried her face against his chest, clutching his jacket like a lifeline. Ethan held her fiercely, his arms wrapping around her like armor. They stood there in the darkness, two broken people holding each other up against a world determined to tear them down. For the first time, Lily allowed herself to believe he wasn't going to leave. Minutes or hours later, she wasn't sure, Ethan finally pulled back. "We can't stay here," he said, glancing around the shadowy alley. "Come with me." Lily hesitated, fear and pride warring inside her. But one look at the tenderness in his eyes, and she nodded. Ethan took her hand and didn't let go as he led her toward his car parked down the block. The ride was silent. Lily pressed herself against the window, watching the city blur past. Ethan kept glancing at her, worry etched into every line of his face. When they pulled into the underground garage of his building, she hesitated again. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "Just for tonight," he said. "You're safe here." The word safe made her throat tighten painfully. Inside his penthouse, everything felt too clean, too untouched. Lily stood awkwardly by the door, feeling like a stain on a white carpet. Ethan fetched a first aid kit and returned, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "Please," he said, patting the cushion beside him. Lily sat stiffly, her hands twisting in her lap. Ethan cleaned the scrapes on her arms, his touch so gentle it broke her a little more. "I should have been there sooner," he said bitterly, more to himself than her. "This is my fault." Lily caught his wrist, stopping his movements. "No, it's not," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare blame yourself." Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and something in his chest splintered. She was so damn strong, stronger than anyone he'd ever known. After patching her up, Ethan disappeared into another room and returned with a worn t-shirt and sweatpants. "They'll be too big," he said sheepishly. Lily accepted them with a murmured thanks and disappeared into the bathroom. When she returned, swimming in his clothes, Ethan felt something he couldn't name tighten around his heart. They didn't talk much after that. Lily curled up at one end of the sofa. Ethan sat at the other, wide awake despite the late hour. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with things left unsaid. Ethan wanted to cross the space between them, to pull her into his arms and swear he'd never let anything hurt her again. But he stayed where he was, waiting for her to choose. Outside, the city slept restlessly, oblivious to the quiet war being waged inside Ethan's living room. Lily closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under. Ethan watched her for a long time, making silent promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He didn't know how to save her from the world, or from herself, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to stop trying. Far below them, in the greasy back alleys of the city, Vince nursed his bruises and plotted revenge. He had underestimated Ethan Blake, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. Next time, he wouldn't just scare Lily. He would destroy everything she cared about. And Ethan Blake had just painted a big red target on his back. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting soft light across the penthouse's polished floors. Lily woke with a start, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling above her. For a moment, panic gripped her chest, then the memories returned, crashing down like a tidal wave. The alley, Vince, Ethan's arms around her. She sat up slowly, clutching, the blanket closer around her. Across the room, Ethan stirred from his chair, his body stiff from sleeping upright. He rubbed the back of his neck and offered her a tired smile. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. Lily mumbled a greeting, her cheeks heating as she realized she had drooled a little on his pristine sofa. Ethan didn't seem to care. If anything, he looked relieved just to see her awake. "I made coffee," he said, gesturing toward the kitchen. Lily hesitated before slipping off the sofa and padding across the cool marble floor. She poured herself a cup with shaking hands, savoring the bitter warmth. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her with a careful kind of stillness, like a man trying not to frighten a wounded animal. It should have annoyed her. Instead, it comforted her. After a few minutes of silence, Ethan spoke. "You don't have to leave yet," he said gently. "Stay as long as you want." Lily lowered her mug, her throat tightening. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept the safety he offered without feeling like she was betraying herself. But pride was a stubborn, ugly thing, whispering in her ear that nothing good ever lasted. "I'll only stay until I find another place," she said quietly. Ethan nodded without argument, though disappointment flickered briefly across his face. "Whatever you need," he said, and he meant it. Lily could see it in the way he didn't try to cage her, didn't try to control her. He simply stood there, offering her a choice. It terrified her more than any threat Vince ever made. The day passed slowly, a quiet rhythm developing between them. Lily dozed on the sofa while Ethan took calls from his office, speaking in low, clipped tones. Occasionally, he glanced over at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. She looked so out of place among the penthouse's gleaming surfaces, yet somehow she belonged there more than any of the cold furniture or sterile decor. By evening, Lily found herself perched on a stool at the kitchen island while Ethan prepared a simple meal. Watching him fumble awkwardly with a skillet made her smile despite herself. "You're terrible at this," she teased. Ethan chuckled. "That's why I usually have a chef." Lily shook her head, amused. "Rich people problems." He grinned at her, and for the first time the tension between them eased into something softer. They ate in companionable silence, the clink of forks against plates filling the space between them. Afterward they sat on the floor by the massive windows, watching the city lights flicker to life like 1,000 tiny stars. Lily hugged her knees to her chest, feeling strangely exposed and yet safer than she had in months. Ethan sat beside her, close but not touching. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly, her voice almost lost to the hum of the city. Ethan turned his head to look at her. "Leaving what?" "This life," she said, waving vaguely at the glittering skyline. "The suits, the meetings, the expectations." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "All the time." His honesty startled her. "Why don't you?" she whispered. Ethan's smile was small, almost sad. "Because I don't know who I am without it." Lily stared at him, her heart aching. She understood that more than he knew. They were both trapped in lives they hadn't chosen, clinging to survival in their own stubborn ways. Maybe that's why. She couldn't let go of her walls completely, not yet. As the night deepened, Lily's eyelids grew heavy. Ethan offered her his hand wordlessly, and she let him pull her to her feet. He led her to the guest room, pausing in the doorway. "If you need anything," he said, voice soft, "I'm right down the hall." Lily nodded, her throat too tight for words. She closed the door gently between them and leaned against it, exhaling shakily. In the dark, Lily curled up beneath the crisp sheets, Ethan's scent lingering faintly in the fabric. She pressed her face into the pillow, feeling the tears slip down her cheeks, not from fear, not from sadness, but from something infinitely more dangerous. Hope. A feeling she had long ago taught herself to kill. She hated that Ethan was making her believe again. Meanwhile, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by the image of her bruised face, her trembling hands. He had never cared about anyone like this, not even close, and it scared the hell out of him. He wanted to protect her, yes, but more than that, he wanted her to choose to stay, not because she needed him, but because she wanted him. Miles away, Vince sat hunched over a dingy table, nursing a bottle of cheap whiskey. His bruises were healing, but his rage burned hotter than ever. Lily thought she could hide behind her new protector. She thought she was safe. She was wrong. Vince grinned wickedly as he scribbled down a list of names. If he couldn't hurt her directly, he would tear apart everything she cared about, and Ethan Blake was at the very top of that list. The following morning dawned with an eerie calm, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Lily woke to the aroma of fresh coffee and the low murmur of Ethan's voice carrying down the hallway. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, before the events of the past few days slammed back into her chest. Despite everything, part of her dared to hope today might be normal, or at least less broken. In the kitchen, Ethan hung up his phone, tension lining his jaw. He forced a smile when Lily appeared, rumpled and blinking sleep from her eyes. "Morning," he said, pushing a cup toward her. She murmured a thanks, studying him carefully. Something was off. She could feel it vibrating under his skin, like a wire pulled too tight, but Ethan didn't volunteer any explanations. After breakfast, Lily insisted on heading out. "I can't hide forever," she said, pulling on a borrowed jacket that swallowed her frame. Ethan didn't argue, but he insisted on driving her to the market. As they pulled up to her usual spot, a sinking feeling coiled in her stomach. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Her flower stand was gone, completely gone, not a single crate or stem in sight. She jumped out of the car, heart pounding. "No, no, no," she muttered, spinning around. Ethan was out a second later, coming to stand beside her. Lily rushed to the nearest vendor she knew. "Where's my stand?" she demanded. The old man grimaced sympathetically. "City came through last night," he said. "Said your permit was revoked. Took everything." Lily staggered back as if struck. "That's not possible," she breathed. She had fought for that permit, paid every ridiculous fee. Ethan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his own expression darkening. He knew corruption when he saw it, and he had no doubt whose fingerprints were all over this. Vince wasn't just threatening anymore. He was dismantling Lily's life, piece by piece. Back in the car, Lily stared blankly out the window, her fists clenched in her lap. "He's not going to stop," she said, voice hollow. Ethan gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. "Then we won't either," he said fiercely. But inside, doubt gnawed at him. Vince had reach, connections, and Ethan was realizing that protecting Lily would be harder and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. That afternoon, Ethan made calls. He pulled every favor, threatened every official he needed to, trying to get Lily's permit reinstated. But the city bureaucracy was a swamp, and Vince had already poisoned the waters. Doors that once opened, for Ethan with a whisper now slammed shut in his face. It enraged him more than he let on. It terrified him more than he admitted. Meanwhile, Lily sat in the penthouse, her body restless, her mind racing. She hated being trapped inside these glass walls, no matter how luxurious they were. She hated feeling powerless. She hated that Vince still had the power to ruin her life from the shadows. But most of all, she hated the fear that curled cold and vicious inside her chest. Fear that she couldn't protect herself, or Ethan. When Ethan returned that evening, she was sitting on the floor by the massive windows, knees pulled to her chest. He dropped onto the floor beside her without a word, handing her a takeout box. Lily accepted it numbly, picking at the food without appetite. They ate in silence, both lost in their own haunted thoughts. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the small war brewing in its gutters. After dinner, Ethan finally spoke. "We'll find another way," he said. "You can start somewhere new, build something even better." Lily shook her head miserably. "You don't get it," she whispered. "That stand was everything. It was mine. I fought for it." Ethan swallowed hard, guilt coiling in his gut. He wanted to fix it, fix everything. But some things couldn't be replaced with money or promises. Suddenly, Lily turned to him, eyes flashing with anger. "Why are you still here?" she demanded. Ethan blinked, stunned. "What?" "Why do you care?" she hissed, the words sharp-edged and trembling. "You don't owe me anything. You could walk away right now and never look back." Ethan stared at her, stunned by the raw desperation in her voice. "Because I don't want to," he said simply. "Because I—" He broke off, the words catching in his throat. He wasn't ready. Maybe she wasn't either. Lily laughed bitterly, wiping her face roughly. "You're crazy," she muttered. Ethan reached out hesitantly, brushing her fingers with his own. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not leaving, not unless you tell me to." For a long moment, Lily said nothing. Then slowly, she shook her head. No, she didn't want him to leave, and that terrified her more than anything Vince could do. She sagged against him, exhausted beyond words, and Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might slip away at any moment. They stayed like that, two broken souls clinging to each other against a storm they couldn't yet see. Far away, Vince stood outside a dingy club, cell phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah," he said, grinning wickedly. "Everything's in place. Next move's gonna hurt, real bad." He snapped the phone shut and flicked his cigarette into the gutter, already tasting the satisfaction of revenge. He wasn't just going to take Lily's life apart. He was going to make sure she knew it was all because she trusted Ethan Blake. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm of quiet fear and restless waiting. Lily stayed close to the penthouse, a prisoner of invisible chains Vince had wrapped around her life. Ethan tried to keep her spirits up, bringing her books, teaching her how to cook disastrous meals, even sharing embarrassing stories from his youth. For fleeting moments, they laughed, but underneath it all, dread simmered. Ethan's world outside the penthouse began to unravel. Important meetings were mysteriously cancelled. Contracts he had secured for months suddenly fell through. His name, once synonymous with unshakable power, started slipping through the cracks, whispers in boardrooms, smirks in corridors. Ethan knew sabotage when he saw it, and he knew exactly where it was coming from. One evening, after another brutal day, Ethan returned home to find Lily curled up on the couch reading. She looked up at him, immediately sensing the storm behind his forced smile. "What happened?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head, dropping his briefcase with a heavy thud. "Nothing we can't fix," he lied. But Lily wasn't fooled. She saw the shadows growing under his eyes. Later, when he thought she was asleep, Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the endless sea of lights. He wasn't afraid for himself. He had clawed his way to the top once. He could do it again, but he was terrified that Lily would be caught in the crossfire. Vince wasn't playing games anymore. He was dismantling Ethan's life the same way he had destroyed Lily's, and she didn't even know it yet. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. Ethan's company stock, usually a fortress against market fluctuations, plummeted overnight. Investors panicked. Board members called emergency meetings. The media caught wind of it almost instantly. Headlines screamed across every platform. Ethan Blake, fall from grace. His phone didn't stop ringing, but he didn't answer a single call. At the penthouse, Lily watched the news coverage with growing horror. Ethan stood behind her, frozen, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. She turned to him slowly. "This is because of me," she whispered. Ethan shook his head fiercely. "No, this is because of Vince. None of this is your fault." But Lily didn't believe him. She could see it all too clearly now, what being close to her cost. That night, the argument started. Small at first, little things. Frustrations neither of them dared aim at Vince, aimed instead at each other. Lily snapped over a spilled cup of coffee. Ethan snapped when she tried to pack her things. Every word was a crack in the foundation they had barely begun to build. Neither of them wanted to say what they were thinking. Maybe love wasn't enough. "You don't understand," Lily cried, shoving clothes into a bag. "You're losing everything because of me." Ethan grabbed her wrists gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I'm losing nothing that matters," he said fiercely. "You're what matters." Tears spilled down Lily's cheeks. She wanted so badly to believe him, but pride and fear twisted inside her like knives. "You deserve better," she whispered brokenly. Ethan cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her tears away. "There's no better for me," he said. "There's only you." Lily sagged against him, sobbing quietly. For a long time they just stood there, clinging to each other like drowning people clinging to driftwood. But some part of Lily's heart had already started to pull away. The next morning, Lily was gone. Ethan found the note on the kitchen counter, written in shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry. I have to protect you. Don't come after me." His hands shook as he read it. His heart felt like it had been ripped out of his chest. He slammed a fist into the marble counter, the pain doing nothing to dull the agony clawing at him from the inside. Meanwhile, Lily wandered the city streets, a ghost among the crowds. She had nowhere to go, no plan, just an overwhelming need to disappear. She thought leaving would save Ethan, that Vince would finally stop once she was out of the picture, but deep down, she knew it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing ever was. And the worst part, she missed him already. Back at the penthouse, Ethan made one silent promise as he stared out over the sprawling city. He wasn't going to let her go. He wasn't going to let fear win. Not this time. Wherever Lily Brooks ran, whatever walls she tried to build between them, he would find her. He would fight for her, because real love wasn't about letting go. It was about holding on when everything else was falling apart. And Ethan Blake wasn't done fighting. The city had never felt bigger, never felt colder. Ethan moved through the streets like a ghost, searching every familiar corner, every crowded station. He asked vendors, restaurant owners, even homeless men on sidewalks, flashing Lily's photo and offering rewards he knew she would hate. Days blurred into nights, but he refused to stop. Somewhere out there, she was scared and alone, and he had promised he would never leave her. Meanwhile, Lily found temporary shelter in the back room of an old bookstore downtown. The owner, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, didn't ask questions when Lily offered to sort and clean in exchange for a cot and leftovers. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Independence was a bitter comfort now, cold and hard in her chest. She had traded love for safety, but she couldn't silence the emptiness that hollowed her out. Every night Ethan returned to his penthouse, more broken than before. He stared at the couch where she used to curl up, the kitchen counter where her laughter once echoed, the window where they had watched the city together. Her absence was a living thing, gnawing at the edges of his sanity, and worse, he blamed himself. If he had fought harder, held tighter, maybe she wouldn't have slipped away. Lily avoided looking at newspapers or TVs, but rumors still filtered. In Ethan Blake, the golden boy of New York was crumbling, stocks still falling, investors still fleeing, his empire burning faster than anyone had imagined. She knew Vince's hand was behind it all, twisting the knife. But she couldn't go back. She couldn't be the reason Ethan lost everything he had built. One afternoon, as she organized dusty books, Lily found herself tracing the spine of one novel about lost love. Her throat closed up. She missed him. God, she missed him. The way he smiled, like he was surprised he still could. The way he always gave her a choice. The way he looked at her like she was something precious. She pressed her forehead against the shelf, fighting tears. Meanwhile, Ethan's desperation grew darker. He hired private investigators, tapped into favors he hadn't touched in years. Still nothing. She had disappeared so completely it was almost admirable, if it hadn't been killing him. Friends warned him to let go, to focus on salvaging his crumbling empire. But Ethan didn't listen. Money meant nothing if it wasn't enough to bring Lily back. Late one night, sitting alone in his car, Ethan thought of the black rose she had found once taped to her door. A symbol of threat, a message. He realized then, Vince wasn't just trying to scare Lily. He was trying to break her spirit, to make her run. And now that she was gone, Vince was winning. Ethan's chest burned with rage. He couldn't let it end like this. Lily, on the other hand, was slowly breaking. She pretended during the day, joking with customers, smiling politely, but at night the loneliness swallowed her whole. She dreamed of Ethan's hands, warm and steady, dreamed of his voice calling her back. Every morning she woke gasping, heart pounding, knowing she had chosen this exile. She had left him to save him. Hadn't she? The bookstore owner noticed the sadness creeping into Lily's face. One evening, she pressed a warm cup of tea into Lily's hands and said gently, "Whatever you're running from, sometimes running away isn't the same as protecting someone. Sometimes it's just abandoning yourself." Lily didn't respond. She couldn't, but those words lodged deep inside her like a splinter. Elsewhere, Vince celebrated. He had connections. Inside Ethan's board now, people who whispered lies into ears that once trusted him. Deals were sabotaged before they even reached the table. Clients disappeared overnight. Ethan's name was being dragged through the mud, and Vince relished every second of it. Soon, Ethan Blake would be nothing but a cautionary tale. Ethan didn't care about the fortunes slipping through his fingers. He cared about Lily, the girl who had fought him, challenged him, and ultimately taught him what love really meant. He sat alone in his shattered office one night, staring at the empty chair where she had once teased him mercilessly. "I'm not giving up," he whispered into the silence. "Not ever." Back at the bookstore, Lily finally reached a breaking point. She couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't keep living half alive, waiting for the pain to numb itself. She sat down at the rickety table and pulled out a sheet of paper. Her hand shook as she wrote, heart racing with every word. She didn't know if Ethan would even see it, but she had to try. "I miss you," the letter began. "I miss the way you never asked me to be anything but myself. I miss the way you fought for me when I was too tired to fight for myself. I was wrong to think leaving would protect you. All I did was break us both. I love you, Ethan Blake. I always have." She sealed the envelope with trembling fingers, scrawling his name on the front. No address, no return, just a prayer. And as she slipped out into the night to find a way to get the letter to him, she didn't notice the shadow watching her from across the street. Vince smiled coldly. The trap was almost ready. All he had to do was let love lead them straight into his hands. The night air was thick with fog as Lily tucked the letter deep into her jacket. She moved quickly through the alleys, avoiding well-lit streets, instinct guiding her steps. Her heart pounded with every footfall, half from fear, half from hope. If she could just get the letter into the right hands, maybe Ethan would understand. Maybe it wasn't too late for them after all. She reached an old post office clinging to the edge of the financial district, a place barely anyone used anymore. It smelled like dust and forgotten dreams. Lily hesitated on the steps, the envelope feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. Doubts clawed at her. What if Ethan hated her now? What if Vince had poisoned everything beyond repair? Still, she stepped forward. Inside, the clerk barely looked up as she approached. Lily slid the envelope across the counter. "Urgent delivery," she said quietly. The clerk nodded, stamping it with a mechanical thud. No return address, just a name and a silent plea tucked into the paper folds. As she stepped back onto the street, Lily exhaled a shaky breath, feeling lighter and more terrified. All at once, across town, Ethan sat in his penthouse, staring blankly at a legal document in his hands, another company pulling out, another knife in his side. His phone buzzed on the table, but he ignored it. He didn't care about business anymore. Not without her. Somewhere deep inside, he still believed she was alive, still fighting. He just had no idea how to find her. That changed the next morning when his assistant stormed into his crumbling office, waving a battered envelope. "Sir, you need to see this," she said breathlessly. Ethan frowned, taking the letter. The handwriting was shaky, familiar in a way that made his heart thud painfully. He ripped it open, eyes devouring every word. By the end, his hands were shaking. He stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. Without a word to anyone, he grabbed his coat and stormed out. Hope, terrifying, fragile hope, ignited in his chest. She was alive. She missed him. She loved him. He couldn't waste another second. Somewhere out there, Lily was still reachable, and he was going to find her if it was the last thing he did. Meanwhile, Lily wandered the city aimlessly, afraid to return to the bookstore. Vince's shadows lurked around every corner now. She could feel them watching, waiting. But she had no idea how close the danger truly was. Vince wasn't just lurking anymore, he was hunting, and this time he wasn't planning to let her slip away again. Ethan worked through every contact, every whisper, every favor he could call in. He spread out through the lower districts, the forgotten corners where the city's desperate clung to survival. Every bookstore, every flower shop, every street vendor was asked the same question: "Have you seen her?" Some shook their heads. Some glanced away, but one old man finally nodded. "Quiet girl," he said. "Dark hair, sad eyes." He scribbled an address on a scrap of paper and pressed it into Ethan's hand. Ethan didn't waste a second. He raced across the city, weaving through traffic like a man possessed. His heart thundered with every passing block. He was so close. He could almost see her, almost hear her voice. At the same time, Lily realized she couldn't keep running. She turned back toward the bookstore, guilt pressing heavy on her shoulders. She had promised to help the owner that evening. She couldn't just disappear. She had run enough. It was time to face the consequences, whatever they were. As she rounded the corner, she pulled her jacket tighter against the chill. But before she could reach the door, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Vince, smiling like a wolf that had finally cornered its prey. Lily froze, fear locking her muscles. "Missed you, sweetheart," Vince drawled. "Thought you could hide forever?" She took a step back, heart hammering against her ribs. Vince advanced. "Not so tough without your rich boyfriend now, huh?" Lily opened her mouth to scream, but Vince grabbed her roughly, dragging her into the alley. She fought, clawed, kicked, but he was stronger, meaner, and full of venomous rage. Somewhere in the distance, tires screeched. A door slammed, footsteps pounded the pavement, and then a voice, raw, furious, desperate, split the air. "Lily!" Her head snapped toward the sound. Ethan, charging toward them like a force of nature. Vince cursed, yanking Lily tighter. But it was too late. Ethan hit him like a freight train, sending Vince sprawling into the wall. Lily stumbled back, gasping, watching as the two men crashed together in a brutal, violent struggle. Blood splattered the alley walls. Shouts echoed down the narrow street. Frozen, Lily didn't know whether to run or help. Fear rooted her to the spot. Vince landed a savage blow to Ethan's side, making him stagger. For a split second, it looked like Vince might win. And in that terrible moment, Lily made a choice. She grabbed a broken piece of pipe from the ground and hurled it with all her strength, striking Vince across the back. He roared in pain, spinning toward her, but Ethan was faster. With a final, furious punch, he sent Vince crumpling to the ground, unconscious. Breathing hard, Ethan turned to Lily, blood dripping from his mouth. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lily stumbled forward, throwing herself into his arms, sobbing into his chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over again. "I'm so sorry." Ethan held her so tightly it hurt. "You're safe now," he rasped, voice breaking. "I've got you. I'll always have you." And under the broken neon lights of the alley, as sirens wailed distantly, they clung to each other like two souls finally finding home after an endless winter. The police arrived minutes after Vince hit the ground, lights flashing, radios crackling in the cold night air. Ethan stayed between Lily and Vince's unconscious body the entire time, his fists still clenched, his breathing ragged. Lily trembled, uncontrollably, barely hearing the questions the officers hurled at her. All she could focus on was the steady, anchoring pressure of Ethan's hand gripping hers. At the hospital, a nurse cleaned Ethan's wounds while Lily sat silently in the corner, guilt gnawing at her like acid. Every bruise, every cut was her fault. She should have never left. She should have never believed for a second that distance could protect him. Ethan caught her staring, his eyes softening despite the pain radiating from every line of his body. "Stop blaming yourself," he said quietly. Lily shook her head, unable to speak. Ethan winced as the nurse dabbed at a particularly deep gash, but he kept his gaze locked on Lily. "I chose this," he continued. "I chose you, and I'd do it again 1,000 times. His words cracked something deep inside her, something she had thought long dead: hope. After they discharged Ethan with a warning to take it easy, he insisted on walking Lily back to the penthouse. She protested, but he wouldn't hear of it. "We leave together," he said firmly. "From now on, always together." The city spun past in a blur as they rode the elevator up to the familiar glass walls she had once fled. It felt different now, less a prison, more a promise. That night, Lily stood in the guest room doorway, clutching the doorknob tightly. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed across the hall, one hand pressed to his bruised ribs, his head bowed. He looked up when he sensed her watching. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said, voice rough. Lily crossed the hallway slowly, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. Without a word, she sat beside him, resting her head carefully on his shoulder. Ethan froze for a moment, then let out a shuddering breath and leaned into her. They sat there for a long time, no words needed, the silence speaking louder than anything they could say. Healing wasn't fast, it wasn't pretty, but it started in small moments like this, moments where survival gave way to trust. The next few days blurred into a gentle routine. Lily nursed Ethan's bruises, ignoring his grumbled protests. Ethan hovered protectively around her, pretending to be casual but flinching at every loud noise, every unexpected knock at the door. Neither spoke much about Vince, neither had to. The ghost of what had almost happened lingered between them, a shadow they both felt but refused to name. One afternoon, Lily found herself standing at the massive window, staring out at the city that had tried so hard to break them. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms carefully around her waist. She leaned back into him, feeling the strength of his heartbeat against her spine. "We should leave," he said softly. "Start over. Somewhere new." Lily considered it, the idea both terrifying and intoxicating. A fresh start. No more looking over their shoulders, no more shadows lurking in alleyways, just them and a future they could build from the ashes. "Where would we go?" she asked. Ethan smiled against her hair. "Anywhere you want. Paris, Rome, or maybe just a small town where no one knows our names." The idea was almost too beautiful to believe, but Lily had learned the hard way that beautiful things were fragile. "And what about everything you built here?" she whispered. Ethan turned her gently to face him. "None of it means anything without you," he said. "Money, power, it's all empty. You're the only thing that ever made it real." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough. Now was the time to choose, to stop running, to fight for the life she wanted instead of settling for the one fear had trapped her in. She reached up, cupping Ethan's battered face between her palms. "Then let's go," she said. "Let's run, but this time, together." Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that broke her heart and healed it all at once. "Together," he promised. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, the world narrowing down to just the two of them. For the first time in longer than either could remember, the future didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting for them to paint it with something fierce and wild and free. But far below them, in the winding back alleys of the city, another plan was taking shape. Vince might have been defeated, but he wasn't the only danger lurking in the shadows. Enemies Ethan had long forgotten were starting to stir, drawn by the scent of blood and weakness. And love, as powerful as it was, had a way of making even the strongest men vulnerable. For now, though, Ethan and Lily had a pocket of peace, a fragile moment suspended in time. They didn't know how long it would last. They didn't know how hard the next fight would be. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side, and neither of them was ever running again. In the following days, the penthouse transformed from a fortress of loneliness into something warmer, more alive. Lily filled the sterile spaces with laughter, with little touches of chaos Ethan secretly loved. A book left open on the kitchen table, a flower tucked into a whiskey glass. Pieces of her everywhere. Ethan soaked it in like a man dying of thirst. They spent late nights planning their escape. Scribbled maps, half-finished lists, and airline websites filled Ethan's desk. Lily traced her finger over tiny towns on distant continents, imagining a life without fear. A small flower shop, a dusty bookstore, a world where they could exist simply, without enemies lurking in every shadow. Ethan promised her it could be real. They decided on a sleepy coastal town in Italy, a place with narrow cobbled streets and air that smelled of salt and oranges. They would leave in a week, as soon as Ethan finalized selling off what was left of his company. He didn't mourn it. His empire had always been made of cold, empty things. Lily was the only real empire he ever wanted to build. One evening, they celebrated with cheap wine and badly cooked pasta. Lily danced barefoot across the living room, dragging Ethan into a clumsy waltz. He laughed for the first time in months, the sound echoing against the glass windows. For a few blissful hours, they forgot the city outside, forgot the dangers. They had survived. It was just them. It was enough. But peace is a fragile thing, and danger always knows where to find it. The attack came without warning. Just after midnight, a low rumble shook the building. The lights flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed the penthouse whole. Lily froze, heart hammering in her chest. Ethan reacted instantly, pulling her behind him, scanning the shadows. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice razor-sharp with adrenaline. Somewhere below, alarms shrieked into life. Glass shattered, shouts echoed from the stairwell. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't a random blackout. This was planned, precise, a strike meant to catch them vulnerable. He cursed under his breath, reaching for the emergency gun he kept hidden in the side drawer, a habit from another life he thought he'd left behind. Lily gripped his arm tightly as they moved through the darkness, every creak and groan of the building sounding like a threat. They made it to the emergency stairwell, just as heavy boots thundered up from below. Ethan swore again. "They're already inside," he muttered. "We have to move." He tugged Lily toward the service elevator, a hidden relic the attackers might not know about. The elevator shuddered to life reluctantly, groaning its way down to the garage level. Ethan kept his body between Lily and the doors, gun raised, every muscle coiled tight. Lily's mind raced. Who were they? Vince was gone, wasn't he? Or was this something worse? A debt from Ethan's past come to collect now that he had something precious to lose? When the doors finally hissed open, the garage was eerily silent. Ethan scanned the space quickly before pulling Lily toward his car. Just as he hit the unlock button, headlights blazed to life at the far end of the garage. Another car roared forward, tires screeching against the concrete. Ethan shoved Lily behind the nearest pillar, just as bullets tore through the air where they had been standing. "Go!" he shouted, pushing her toward the maintenance exit. Lily stumbled, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to stay with him. But Ethan's face left no room for argument. She sprinted toward the door, ducking low, hearing the echo of gunfire and the roar of engines. Ethan covered her, returning fire with brutal precision, buying her precious seconds. She burst through the maintenance exit into the freezing night, gasping for breath. Somewhere behind her, more shots rang out. She turned, horrified, just in time to see Ethan stagger, clutching his side. "No!" she screamed, starting back toward him, but he waved her off desperately. "Run!" he roared. "Don't stop!" Tears blurred her vision, but she obeyed. She ran into the night, each step tearing a piece of her apart. Ethan slumped against the concrete wall, blood seeping through his fingers, but his grip on the gun remained. Steady. His mind screamed at him to hold on, to survive, because somewhere in the darkness, Lily was running for her life, and she needed him to be there when she stopped. He gritted his teeth and pulled himself upright, refusing to give in. Far away, in the shadows, unseen eyes watched. A figure lowered a pair of binoculars, a satisfied smirk curling their lips. "Let's see how far love gets you now," the figure murmured before disappearing into the night, leaving behind nothing but chaos and the scent of smoke. The night swallowed Lily as she sprinted down the back alleys, her lungs burning, her heart screaming for her to turn back. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to find help. Ethan was hurt, badly, and every second she wasted was another second he bled alone in that cold, empty garage. Fear clawed at her, but she shoved it down with sheer force of will. She burst into a rundown diner, startling the few patrons hunched over chipped coffee mugs. "Help!" she gasped. "Please, someone call an ambulance." The waitress behind the counter blinked at her, then grabbed the phone, her hands trembling. Lily sagged against the doorframe, every part of her shaking. She had gotten help. Now she had to get back to him. Ignoring the protests of her burning muscles, she sprinted back toward the building. Sirens wailed distantly, too distant. She didn't know if Ethan had minutes or seconds left. When she finally reached the garage entrance, she found the ground smeared with blood, but no sign of Ethan. Her stomach lurched violently. "Ethan!" she screamed, her voice raw. A low groan answered her from the shadows. She spun toward the sound, heart slamming against her ribs. There he was, collapsed behind a stack of crates, pale, barely conscious. "Oh my God!" Lily choked out, rushing to his side. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain, but he managed a weak smile. "Told you not to stop," he rasped. Lily pressed her hands against the wound in his side, desperate to staunch the bleeding. "You're an idiot," she whispered fiercely, tears blurring her vision. "A stubborn, stupid idiot." Ethan's bloodied fingers found hers, squeezing weakly. "Only because I love you," he said, each word a struggle. Lily sobbed, her heart breaking wide open. The ambulance screeched into the garage seconds later. Paramedics swarmed them, voices barking orders Lily barely registered. She refused to let go of Ethan's hand even as they strapped him onto a stretcher. "I'm right here," she promised over and over. "I'm not leaving." Ethan smiled faintly before his eyes rolled back and he slipped into unconsciousness. They shoved Lily into the ambulance beside him, the doors slamming shut with a deafening finality. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and shouted medical jargon. Lily clutched Ethan's cold hand, praying harder than she ever had in her life, bargaining with any force that would listen. Take anything, take everything, just don't take him. At the hospital, they yanked Ethan away from her and disappeared through double doors. Lily was left standing alone in the sterile hallway, Ethan's blood drying on her hands. Hours crawled by. Nurses came and went, avoiding her gaze. No one had answers. No one would tell her if the man she loved was alive or dead. She folded into a plastic chair, shaking uncontrollably. Finally, a doctor appeared, his scrubs stained and his face grim. Lily jumped to her feet, heart in her throat. "He's alive," the doctor said before she could even ask. "It was close. He lost a lot of blood, but we stabilized him. He's going to make it." Lily let out a broken sob, her knees buckling. Relief so overwhelming it felt like pain crashed through her. The doctor smiled gently and touched her arm. "You can see him, but he needs rest." Lily nodded, wiping her face roughly. She followed him down a maze of corridors until they reached a small, dim room. Ethan lay in the bed, pale and battered, machines beeping steadily around him. Lily hesitated. In the doorway, fear and love warring inside her. Slowly, she stepped inside and sat beside his bed. She reached out, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "You're the most reckless, infuriating man I've ever met," she whispered, smiling. Through her tears, Ethan stirred slightly, murmuring something she couldn't catch. She leaned closer, resting her head lightly against his arm. "I'm not running anymore," she whispered. "I'm right where I belong." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Lily allowed herself to believe they might have a future. A messy, complicated, beautiful future. Together. She stayed by his side all night, dozing fitfully, jerking awake every time the machines beeped too loudly. But outside the hospital walls, trouble still brewed. Far across town, a man Lily didn't recognize received a phone call. A smooth, cold voice on the other end gave him simple instructions. "Plan B, no survivors." The man smiled grimly and slipped a gun into his jacket. Love had made Ethan and Lily stronger, but it had also painted a bigger target on their backs than ever before. And this time, the danger wasn't coming for Ethan alone. The hospital at night was a maze of sterile corridors and flickering lights. Lily sat rigid beside Ethan's bed, fighting off the sleep pulling at her. Every beep from the monitors made her jump. Deep down, something felt wrong, the kind of wrong that sank into your bones before anything even happened. She tightened her grip on Ethan's hand, refusing to let fear swallow her whole. Outside the door, heavy footsteps echoed. Lily's head snapped up. At this hour, visitors were rare. She stood quickly, heart thudding painfully against her ribs. The handle of the door turned slowly, deliberately. Lily glanced at Ethan. Still. Unconscious, still vulnerable. Without thinking, she grabbed the metal IV pole, gripping it like a weapon as the door creaked open. A man in dark clothes stepped inside, his face hidden in the dim light. He moved with deadly purpose, a gun glinting in his hand. Lily didn't hesitate. She swung the IV pole with every ounce of strength she had. It connected with a sickening crack, sending the man staggering back. His gun clattered to the floor, spinning across the tiles. Ethan jolted awake at the noise, groggy and confused. Lily screamed, "Run!" But he was already trying to sit up, ignoring the pain. The intruder recovered quickly, lunging for the weapon. Lily dove after it too, her fingers scraping desperately across the slick floor. They collided hard, wrestling for control, the gun sliding between them. Ethan, dragging himself from the bed despite the agony, managed to kick the weapon across the room. The man cursed violently, slamming Lily against the wall. She gasped, stars exploding behind her eyes, but she didn't back down. She kicked and clawed, fueled by a terror that had no room for mercy. She wasn't going to lose Ethan, not now, not ever. The struggle shifted. Ethan, despite his injuries, grabbed a syringe from the nearby tray. He lunged, driving it into the man's neck with brutal precision. The attacker gurgled, eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the floor. Silence fell, thick and deafening. Lily stumbled to Ethan's side, catching him as his legs buckled under the strain. Alarms blared moments later as hospital security flooded the hallway. Nurses screamed, doctors shouted, chaos erupted around them. Lily and Ethan were hustled out of the room by frantic staff, still trying to process what had just happened. Lily's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Ethan leaned heavily against her, blood staining his hospital gown anew. They ended up in a secure wing under police protection. An officer explained that the man was connected to a known criminal network. A hit had been ordered on both of them. Lily swallowed hard, the reality sinking deep into her gut. This wasn't over. Winning their freedom wasn't just about surviving Vince anymore. They had poked a sleeping monster much larger than either had realized. Ethan, sitting on a clean bed in the new room, reached for Lily's hand. "I should have seen it coming," he rasped, guilt heavy in every syllable. Lily squeezed his hand tightly. "We both should have, but we're still here. We still have each other." Her voice cracked on the last words, but she didn't look away. She wouldn't let fear steal their future again. For the first time, Ethan didn't argue. He just nodded, exhaustion dragging at his features. "We leave tomorrow," he said. "No more waiting, no more planning. We run together." Lily pressed her forehead to his, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Together," she whispered, sealing the promise with everything she had left to give. The police promised to station guards at the doors, but Lily didn't trust promises anymore. She sat awake that night, a chair wedged under the door handle. The lights on, a makeshift weapon clutched tightly in her lap. Every shadow seemed to crawl, every sound stretched too long. She kept vigil while Ethan slept, knowing they were living on borrowed time. As dawn broke, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, Lily finally allowed herself a sliver of hope. They had survived another night. They had survived another attempt to tear them apart. She stood slowly, muscles aching, and crossed to the window, staring out at the waking city. Somewhere out there, a plane waited. A new life waited. Behind her, Ethan stirred. His voice was rough but determined. "It's time." Lily turned, heart hammering, and nodded. She helped him dress carefully, every movement tender and deliberate. They packed what little they had into a single battered duffel bag. No more penthouses. No more boardrooms, just them, and a future carved out of fire and stubborn hope. As they stepped into the hallway, hand in hand, Lily felt the weight of the past fall away, leaving only the hard, bright truth of what they had built together. Whatever came next, whatever dangers, whatever battles, they would face it the only way they knew how, side by side, refusing to break, refusing to give up. But as they turned the corner toward the exit, a figure blocked their path. And this time, the danger wasn't hidden behind shadows. It was staring them straight in the face. The figure blocking their path was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark jacket that concealed his intentions. Lily's body tensed instinctively, stepping in front of Ethan despite knowing he was stronger. The man's eyes, cold and calculating, scanned them both before he spoke. "Going somewhere?" His voice was laced with mockery, but Lily heard the threat simmering underneath. Ethan shifted slightly behind her, his voice low and steady. "Step aside." The man smirked, as if amused by the demand. "You think you can just walk away?" he sneered. "After everything you've stirred up?" His hand twitched toward his jacket, and Lily knew there was a weapon hidden there. The hospital guards were too far behind. No backup, it was just them. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Every instinct screamed at Lily to run, but she stood her ground. Ethan, despite the blood, loss and the pain, straightened his spine, stepping up beside her. "We're not running," Ethan said, voice steel. "Not anymore." The man laughed darkly, a cruel sound that echoed off the sterile walls. "Then you're going to die here." The man's hand dipped toward his jacket. Without thinking, Lily moved. She didn't hesitate, didn't doubt. She slammed the duffel bag into his arm, throwing off his aim. Ethan lunged at the same moment, using every ounce of strength left in his battered body to tackle the man to the ground. They struggled fiercely, grunting and cursing, until Ethan managed to pin the man's arm. Lily kicked the weapon away just as security came barreling around the corner, guns drawn. They swarmed the scene, dragging the attacker off Ethan and slamming him against the wall. Lily dropped to her knees beside Ethan, cradling his face in her hands. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Heart-hammering, Ethan managed a crooked smile. "I am now." The police arrived minutes later, taking statements, hauling the attacker away in cuffs. Ethan and Lily clung to each other through it all, refusing to let the world separate them again. When the chaos finally died down, a detective approached them quietly. "You two need to disappear," he said, "tonight, before anyone else comes looking." Lily met Ethan's eyes and found no hesitation there. They didn't even return to the hospital room. They just walked straight out the doors into the blinding morning light. The city buzzed around them, indifferent as ever, but Lily didn't feel small anymore. She felt alive, stronger than she had ever thought possible. Ethan squeezed her hand, and together they hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of the airport. At the terminal, everything felt surreal. A one-way ticket to Italy, a life packed into a single bag. Ethan leaned heavily on Lily as they moved through security, but he smiled the entire time. A real smile, a free smile. Lily caught herself laughing through her tears, feeling lighter than she had in years. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived. The plane took off, just as the sun dipped low on the horizon, bathing the world in molten gold. Lily stared out the window, Ethan's hand warm in hers. "We made it," she whispered. Ethan turned his head, studying her like she was something he still couldn't believe was real. "We're just getting started," he said, and kissed the back of her hand tenderly. Italy welcomed them with open arms and salty air. They found a small, sun-drenched town perched on the cliffs, with winding streets and ancient stones that whispered of resilience. Lily opened a flower shop. Ethan, for the first time, worked with his hands, fixing, building, creating. They built a home filled with second chances and the stubborn kind of love that refuses to die. They didn't pretend it was perfect. They still had scars. Nights when Lily woke, gasping from nightmares. Days when Ethan stared too long at the shadows. But they faced it all together, stronger for every crack and break they had survived. Their love wasn't neat or easy. It was messy and bruised and breathtakingly real. On the anniversary of the night they met, Ethan took Lily down to the rocky beach beneath their town. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, his hands shaking just slightly. "You saved me," he said simply. "Not just that night. Every night after." Tears streamed down Lily's face as he opened the box, revealing a simple silver band gleaming in the moonlight. "I thought I had everything," Ethan continued. "Money, power, but I was empty until I found you. You gave me something real, something worth fighting for. Will you marry me, Lily Brooks?" She laughed through her sobs, nodding so hard her hair whipped around her face. "Yes," she gasped, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and they kissed as the waves crashed against the rocks below. No more running, no more hiding, just two stubborn hearts that had chosen each other again and again in a world that had tried so hard to tear them apart. Because in the end, love isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, about standing in the fire and choosing to stay. And Ethan Blake and Lily Brooks had chosen each other for this lifetime and every lifetime after. Wow, what a story, right? I'd love to hear what you thought. Drop a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tell me where you're watching from. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories we have on the channel. There's so much more waiting for you.